Deloitte presents India's Digital Banking Maturity Pulse in association with CNBC TV 18.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Deloitte Presents India's Digital Banking Maturity Pulse in association with CNBC TV 18. Today, we put the spotlight on the findings of the second edition of Deloitte's Digital Banking Maturity Survey, which is a part of Deloitte's Global Digital Banking Maturity Survey that they conduct every 2 years. Now, this global report evaluates the digital maturity of 349 banks across 44 global markets, and that includes India, and also tracks the progress across key retail banking functions. Now, India has been able to make impressive strides in just its second year of participation, with 9 Indian banks being named among the world's top 40 digital champions. From user experience to AI integration and beyond banking services, the results reflect a remarkable shift in how Indian banks are digitally evolving to be able to meet future demands. With that, let me welcome Vijay Mani, who's partner and banking and capital markets leader at Deloitte India, to dive into this report and its key findings. Vijay, thank you very much for your time here on CNBC TV 18. Pleasure to have you in our studio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let me start by asking you, it's a big report. You do it once every 2 years. Start by telling us about the big findings from this time around.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, this is the second time that India has participated in this survey. It's a global survey. It's been running for a while, conducted every 2 years. This was the 6th edition. This year we had 349 banks, as you mentioned, of which 12 were Indian banks.
Yeah.
The biggest takeaway is that out of these 12 banks, 9 banks were designated as digital champions. What that means is that they are in the top 40 banks out of the 349 banks in terms of the maturity of the functionality they offered across 3 channels: internet banking, mobile banking, the public website. Mobile banking also includes instant messaging services such as WhatsApp banking. Right? So, the biggest takeaway is that 9 out of 12, which means nearly 1 in 4 digital champion banks globally are now Indian banks. Right? So, the Indian banks have really extended their maturity over the last 2 to 3 years. And if you were to double click on where they have really scored high or increased their maturity, basically 2 areas. One is day-to-day banking, and that includes maturity of payment transactions, so merchant payment experience, and also related to that, managing their card functionality. So the ability to block a card, the ability to set limits on cards, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And the other area is also is related to expanding the relationship with the customer. So going beyond day-to-day banking, upselling services, cross-selling services, and also providing loyalty and rewards in a much better manner than what was available 3 to 4 years back.
But if you compare it to your last survey, what really has been the big shift that really stands out? Apart from some of these things that you mentioned, day-to-day banking services have improved, your card functionality and how you control it has improved. But what has been the big shift when you compare it to the position from 2 years ago?
When we look at the global banks and compare them with the Indian banks, I think the global banks had a lot to do when it came to account opening, customer onboarding, those kind of experiences or journeys. I think Indian banks were already pretty strong in that area, right? Given our digital public infrastructure, given Aadhaar, given the eKYC norms that we have, right? So really, the global banks were playing a bit of a catch-up game with the Indian banks. And the Indian banks in the last 3 years focused more on day-to-day banking, as I mentioned, and managed to put in a lot more innovation into the kind of experiences they offered. Right? So that's why they really surged ahead.
But what would you attribute as the key factors that have helped them get to that position? 9 out of 12 banks being Indian. DPI, of course, has been a big enabler. But apart from that, if you could point out the big factors that have really shifted the needle.
I would say 2 things, right? One is the fintech ecosystem in India has really meant that customers were exposed to, what good looks like, right? And that kind of raised customer expectations.
Yeah.
And this has been happening for nearly a decade, right? And so over the last 3 to 4 years, it came into more focus, and the banks also realized that, they have to invest to bring the experience up. So I think that's been one major factor. The other factor that we're seeing, and this is happening globally, and we're seeing this in India as well, is that customers are seeking more familiar experiences. So if you have a great experience on a quick commerce app, your expectation on what your banking app needs to do also goes up,
Yeah.
right? And therefore, banks have had to, step up and try and offer similar experiences. So I think those are the two factors that have really contributed to more investment and more innovation.
But if you compare the Indian market and where our banks today are to some of the more advanced countries that have done better on their digital banking fronts, what are the big lessons that India can learn, and what are these countries from which India can learn?
Yeah, so we covered 44 markets, and that's been a mix of developed markets and emerging markets. Let me go to the question about what can Indian banks learn. I think there are two major factors, two areas where they can learn a lot. One is customer support.
Yeah.
Even the Indian digital champions, the average score on customer support was 51%. The average banks, overall 12 banks scored only 48%. Even the digital champions in India scored only 51%. Compare that to the global digital champions, they scored 67%.
Okay.
So there is a lot of gap in terms of customer support maturity on these channels, right? So that is one key area. The other key area, I would say, is ecosystem and aggregation. And related to that are, what that means for personal financial management, what that means for investment services. When we look at the global banks, the global digital champions, I would say, more than the global banks, they've been able to aggregate information on finances in a much better manner and then provide allied services such as investments in a much better manner, right? I think in India, there's a lot. The infrastructure is there. We have the requisite public infrastructure. It just needs to be leveraged better for this.
Let me flip the coin then. So this is where India can learn. But what are the areas where other banks in other countries can learn from Indian banks and the kind of innovations they've been able to bring about?
Yeah, I think payments is one major area. I would
No
say
doubt,
India is
that's been
way
a
ahead.
superstar story. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And UPI is certainly a national phenomenon, but increasingly UPI is going global, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot that global banks can look for, when it comes to cross-border payments.
Yeah.
Either, leverage the UPI rails, and, UPI has already gone to about 7 countries. And a lot of markets, developed markets, can also look to leverage that, right? That is certainly one area. The other area is also, when we look at the ecosystem, we are seeing a lot of embedded finance innovation, right? So today, when you do e-commerce checkout, you can get a loan very easily, right? Embedded payments of various sorts. We're also seeing, and this is going beyond banking, but embedded insurance is another phenomenon. So I think globally, global banks can look to India and see how a lot of transactions are originating outside of the mobile banking channel and the internet banking channel, and how more innovation can happen in that area.
All right. Since we're talking about banking and digital banking and it being this also great equalizer and this force to drive inclusion in the country, very important for a country like India where financial inclusion still lags even with the Jan Dhan accounts. We know the amount of activity has been low. So what sort of catalyst can digital banking serve to ensure that there is more inclusive growth?
Absolutely. I think certainly when we look at non-urban India, there is tremendous potential for increased penetration of banking services. And the digital channel is going to be very important because of its cost effectiveness and because of the ease. And it's extremely important to bring more and more of the population in non-urban India into the formal financial system meaningfully, not just in terms of accounts and a few payment transactions here and there, but really account for a bulk of their day-to-day payment transactions, and going on from there, a way in which they can manage their finances better and secure their financial future better.
All right. In that regard, will we see more partnerships? Will that enable, getting to that last mile customer, something that maybe the large banks on their own would not be able to achieve?
I think so. That's, the fintech partnerships and the way banks have approached it has been a huge catalyst, right, for the growth of digital banking in urban India. And I think Even in non-urban India, there are a lot of business correspondent channels that have really worked well and have a lot of promise. So I think to go from there to greater penetration of self-service channels will require partnerships and more innovation. In fact, innovation that can actually come from those areas will be critical because they are closer to the customer. There's a better understanding of what will really drive customer adoption, and banks can gain a lot from partnerships from local organizations.
And in your conversation, since you did this survey, you spoke to a lot of banks. What are the areas that they're looking to collaborate in where they see meaningful return?
While the survey did not specifically focus on understanding the partnership model and the evolution of that, a few things that I can say is that one of the biggest challenges in technology is the return on technology investments, right? And one of the good things about India is we have a very vibrant startup ecosystem. We also have a lot of frugality in our technology innovation, right? So I think many of these solutions cannot be thought of centrally, and it cannot be built as mega platforms. Absolutely. It has to happen as micro innovations. Right? And I think that's where banks can gain a lot, and that's what local startups can really bring. Frugal innovation developed locally, simple to maintain, simple to deploy.
Absolutely. Hold your thoughts. We have to take a short break, but we'll return and we'll unpack the metrics that set India's digital champions apart and explore how regulatory frameworks, technology, and innovation are shaping India's digital banking landscape. So stay tuned. We're back in just a moment.
Deloitte presents India's Digital Banking Maturity Pulse in association with CNBC TV18. Deloitte presents India's Digital Banking Maturity Pulse in association with CNBC TV18.
Welcome back to Deloitte Presents India's Digital Banking Maturity Pulse in association with CNBC TV18. And let's continue this insightful conversation by shifting our focus to specific areas of growth, from day-to-day banking improvements to rising customer expectations and the expanding role of beyond banking services. Vijay, thanks for staying on. Speaking of beyond banking, personal finance. With the rise of equity markets as well, we're seeing a huge number of retail investors in record come to, invest like never before, and the financialization of savings that is underway. What can banks do to, do more on this front using some of the tools that are available to them today?
Yeah, I think there are some very basic requirements in personal financial management which banks can do a much better job on, right? For instance, simple categorization of spend transactions. So if I open my app and I want to know how much did I spend on entertainment in the last month, or how much did I spend on, eating out last month, it's difficult to do that, right? And part of it is a data problem as well, because in the ecosystem, you need proper categorization of merchants, and that data needs to flow through to the banks. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done from a data point of view and from a presentation point of view. So the basics of what the spend categorization is, what's my budget, and how did I do compared to my budget, those basics are in place, right? So a lot of work needs to be done there. And taking on from there is this whole idea of hyper-personalization. Now that you know your customer and you know the spend patterns, can you then really very sharply personalize what services would make sense for this customer, what products would make sense for that customer, right? And building the intelligence within the platform, delivering that, and very good feedback loops so that you can learn better and better and improve that personalization over a period of time.
Speaking of hyper-personalization, this artificial intelligence, especially now the generative AI, has been touted as the big game changer. To what extent have banks in India really been able to adopt versus, what you're seeing in some of the global peers?
One of the big requirements when it comes to deploying AI in a financial institution is to have very robust levels of understanding of what models are actually doing, and to have very high levels of explainability. You can't have the philosophy where, run fast and break things, right? That's certainly not the way to go forward. So I think within that constraint of really being very measured in your deployment of AI, For instance, starting more with internal applications when it comes to operational efficiency or operational effectiveness, and then expanding it to the customer. That approach, I think Indian banks have done really well, right? Is there a case for doing more? Absolutely. And I think one major area where banks can do a lot better with deployment of AI is in the area of financial crime.
Yeah,
And
I
we
was going to
have
say cybersecurity. Yeah, you can't talk about digital banking without speaking of it.
exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of deployment of AI can be done to prevent customers from falling victim to financial fraud, and also detecting financial crimes such as money laundering
Okay.
in a more proactive manner.
All right, but still a long way to go for banks to, fully be able to harness the benefits of AI. But globally, are you seeing examples, use cases that we can adopt?
A lot of them. I mean, when it comes to hyper-personalization, for instance, a lot of use of AI. When it comes to expanding the customer relationship, making product recommendations, recommending the next best action. We are seeing a lot of financial institutions globally using AI.
Ecosystem-led banking, that's become a crucial growth area. Just give us a sense of what kind of progress is being made there and what kind of benefits that can unlock.
Yeah, I think we have the account aggregator infrastructure in India, so which is it's a very strong foundation on which to build.
Yeah.
We do have some issues around adoption. When you look at the coverage of accounts and what proportion of transactions that would like to use the account aggregator framework but are not able to use the account aggregator framework, I think more can be done. Basically two things, right? One is the infrastructure investments need to happen. Just like in UPI, you needed a lot of investments. The institutions, particularly the financial information providers, will have to make a lot of investments when it comes to contributing to that framework, right? Which means also there might be some need for incentivization, right? It's only fair that if someone has to make those investments, that there is an incentive for them to do that, right? So I think that's one major area. Once that is in place, I think then the financial information users can then make use of that and then innovate on presenting that information better, and then going on to personalizing what customers can do with that.
The infrastructure is, of course, already there when you speak about the account aggregator, but largely the usage today is for institutions to pull information about the customer when offering them services. What are the challenges when you say, for banks to implement them for retail customers to be able to see everything in one place like you were talking about?
So I think one challenge is there could be infrastructure bottlenecks, right? So if you have a lot of pings in a particular day, at some point, the infrastructure will not be able to keep up, which means the institutions need to invest in that infrastructure. One is that. Second is, customer adoption, which means it will take some amount of time for institutions to provide better experience and the customers to really experience it, to adopt it in a big way, and then for it to then grow into something that becomes more widely used.
Yeah. Well, speaking of digital banking, again, coming back to the fact that the way our parents interacted with digital banking and the way we interact with digital banking and the next generation will look at it is vastly different.
Yeah.
With this new set of, Gen Z and Gen Alpha and everyone coming into the fold, now they've got jobs, they're handling their money. Just give us a sense of how digital banking has to evolve to cater to those needs.
Yeah.
Or is it lagging behind?
I don't think it's lagging behind. I think the banking system as a whole has done really well. It has also made business sense for them, for the banks to use this channel, right? But the future could be different. I think that I look at it in two parts, right? One is non-urban India. In non-urban India, you still don't have high levels of adoption of self-service, right?
Yeah.
And part of it is just the nature of the customer in non-urban India. A lot of existing customers are very comfortable using the smartphone for entertainment. The smartphone penetration is not the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is the comfort when it comes to using the phone for financial transactions. Part of it is language. Part of it is just are you comfortable doing a financial transaction? Those habits might be difficult to change overnight, right? So maybe to some extent there's a generational change required. Young adults will, over a period of time, really move the needle when it comes to penetration of self-service channels. That's one part of it. The other part of it is urban India.
Yeah.
And in urban India, I think when you look at teenagers, when you look at young adults, the way they use digital today is very different from the way, say, someone like me uses digital,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There are platforms that they use for gaming, for entertainment, which I'm not even aware of. Right? And if banks really have to cater to that segment, I think the banks will have to go to those platforms, right? So, and therefore, banks will have to think beyond their mobile banking platform and internet banking platform, and therefore embedded finance becomes important to be able to engage with those customers in those platforms, if not originate transactions on those platforms, right?
All right. So then finally, to conclude, Vijay, Indian banks have made some strides in the last couple of years since you've been doing your survey. What do you hope to see in the next survey, and what will it really take for some of these Indian banks to be featured among the top 5, perhaps globally, in your list later?
One area certainly where I would like to see Indian banks score high and possibly the highest in the world is customer support, to really be top-notch when it comes to across different channels, be able to provide very strong self-service and customer support functionalities. Right? That's one area. The other area is, I think, personal financial management. Again, getting the basics right, for a customer to be able to see a consolidated view of their finances across the ecosystem. And a third area I would add is hyper-personalization.
All right. Well, let's hope there are some strides made, and next time we see a better ranking for some of the Indian lenders. Vijay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you. On that note, we're going to wrap up this special edition in which we explored how Indian banks are fast-tracking their digital maturity and setting new benchmarks globally. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.
Deloitte presents India's Digital Banking Maturity Pulse in association with CNBC TV 18.